going on, we have Eleonora Vercesi that will talk us about a new family of after-solving instances for the metric Tsp. It's something that you connect points, and now you see. Okay, go.
Okay. So, hello, I am Eleonora Vercesi, and I am a PhD student in computational mathematics and decision sciences. So today I will talk about basically what we are doing as a research problem, that is to try to create new hard-to-solve instances for the traveling salesperson problem, and to try to figure out what is the main cause of hardness in traveling salesperson instances. So this is the outline. I will briefly go through the theoretical basis of the problem, but it is just a friendly introduction. I will not say any technicalities. And at the end, subsequently, I will just talk about a brief history of hard instances. So I will review the literature, and at the end, I try to talk about this last family, that is the family of instances I am currently working on. And I will say something about if there is any relationship in terms of time, so hardness, and integrality gap. I will define the integrality gap at a certain point. And at the end, I will conclude and try to sum up and say some future perspective. Okay, so let's start with the Tsp definition. So it's super easy. Given a list of n cities and a cost, Cej, to go from city to citij, we are asking what is the shortest possible route that visits each city exactly once and returns to the origin city. So in this figure, you can see an example. Is it pointing? I don't think so. Oh, but it doesn't matter. In this figure, we can see an example of a famous tour, that is a tour through all the airports in the world, from Pavia to Rinaldi. And we can model the problem as a graph. So in this graph, the cities are the vertices, and the connection between cities are the edges of the graph. So the graph is weighted. So each edge has a correspondent weight, and this weight is the cost to travel from one city to another. I'm saying cities, but actually this problem has a plethora of application without any kind of city. But it's just to say, we can say nodes. Okay, so in the case I am considering, okay, we are considering just axiomatic metrics. So we have the triangular inequality, we have symmetry, and we have also there are not weighted self-loop. Also, we are assuming the completeness of the graph. So we imagine that we are able to connect each pair of city with a weighted edge. Okay, in terms of metric Tsp, so as I said, Tsp instances where the costs are axiomatic metrics, we have three different types of them. So we have the metric Tsp, in which the costs are just axiomatic metrics. We have the Euclidean d-dimensional Tsp that are metric Tsp, but the nodes are coordinates in R2 or Rd. And the rectilinear d-dimensional Tsp, in which cities are still coordinates in Rd, but the cost derived from the L1 norm. So Euclidean L2 norm, rectilinear L1 norm, metric Tsp, any distance you want. Okay, so let's talk about the mathematical model. As I said, we have a graph, and I will always use the same notation, right? So the cardinality of the vertices will always be n, and the cardinality of the edge is fixed, thus the graph is complete, so it is computed in closed form and is always the same. And the problem is how to represent a tour. And the idea is that the tour is represented by an edge incidence vector that is basically a vector of 0 and 1. Each entry is 1 if the edge is picked in the tour, and it's 0 if the edge is not in the tour. Also, another ingredient is a vector of costs, C, and a set tau of all the possible incidence tour, and we basically want to solve the minimum of C transpose X for all X in the tour. So this minimize the cost of a tour, right? Because all the entries of the incidence tour vector are 0, apart from the one are picked for a specific tour. So this is basically the cost of each tour. And of course, this set T, big T, capital T, is finite, but the problem is that very big. So a full exploration, so try all the tour you have, is intractable. So we have to think about other way to solve this problem. And what it is commonly done is to use an integer programming formulation. There are actually a lot of them. And in this slide, you can see the most used mathematical model that is from Dancing et al. It is quite old, but it's still the most used. And I will not go through the detail. I will just say that the first constraint is the degree constraint. And it is a constraint that ensures that the solution of this integer programming we find is such that for in each node just enter one edge and exit one edge. While the second one, it is called the superimation constraint. And we also have that this constraint ensures that you do not find two different loops, but only one connected to in the optimal solution. Then we have the last constraint, that is the problem, the integrality constraints. So the entries of the tour incidence vector can only be 0 or 1. And this problem is NP-hard, so is a very hard problem. And what is commonly done is to start from the relaxation. So when we say relaxation, we mean that basically we are minimizing on something that is bigger. So as we are minimizing, we find a lower bound of the optimal solution because the search space is bigger, so the minimum is more minimum than the real optimal solution. And this is the problem, and the only thing that it changes is the last constraint. So we do not have the integrality constraint no more, but we have just the entry that are between 0 and 1. And so this problem is practically easy, thank you to the simplex algorithm. So we are able to solve this problem pretty quick, and then we are able to provide a lower bound in just a few iterations. Okay, now there is just I think the last technicalities. So how to solve an integer linear programming. What it is commonly done is to do branch and cut. So I will say it just in a nutshell. The idea is that you start by solving the relaxation and you get a lower bound. So you are sure that your minimum, so the real solution of the optimal solution, is it cannot be less than this lower bound. Then you start by solving sub-problems, so you do this sort of tree that here is very small because it's a simple problem, but actually it's very big. And you solve some problems, so a smaller problem, and these problems are easier. And when you branching, that is, you split one problem into sub-problems, you also add cuts. And these cuts are such that they are feasible for the integer optimal solution, so you just throw away feasible solution that cannot be optimal. You just go down with this tree, at a certain point you stop. And you stop when you find an integer optimal solution. So, as I said, you start by solving the relaxation. So you start by solving the second problem I mentioned, and then you end by obtaining the solution of the first problem I mentioned, so an integer 1. So it is clear that the closer is the first problem to the last one, the easier should be to solve this problem. And this is where the definition of integrality gap comes. So if we consider an integer linear programming, and then a relaxation that provides a lower bound, so as I said, any relaxation, but we will focus on the linear relaxation. We can define the integrality gap as the superior of all the instances of a specific problem. This is more general, I'm focusing on Tsp, but it is more general. So the integrality gap is the superior of all the instances of the optimal integer solution, so ILP of the instances, and the lower bound, any lower bound. When we focus on the lower bound computed with the linear relaxation, we will have the integrality gap with respect to the linear relaxation. That is the one I'm interested in my research project. But during this talk, I will just do a small abuse of notation, and I will talk about integrality gap by meaning the integrality gap provided by the linear relaxation. But you can define an integrality gap with respect to any lower bound. So the problem is how to compute this integrality gap. Of course, it cannot be computed in closed form, as all the Tsp instances are infinite. So for the metric Tsp, there is a conjectured value for the integrality gap that is 4 to 3. And it also has been proven for the metric Tsp that the integrality gap should be comprised between 4 to 3 and 3 to 2. And this is the two paper to refer. So we don't know currently, at the moment, what is the right value of the integrality gap. The conjecture is 4 to 3, and we only know that should be less than 3 to 2. Of course, as I said, for a specific instance of a problem, we have the integrality gap that is greater than 1. So the integrality gap is exactly 1 when the lower bound you compute gives you the exact optimal solution of the integer problem. Otherwise, you just have a lower bound, so this ratio should be greater than 1. As I said, as a rule of thumb, as you solve this problem by branch and cut, if you start with an high integrality gap, this means that you start far from the optimal solution, right? So you can imagine that this will lead you to a lot of branching and thus to a lot of time to solve this problem. Okay, so as I said, now I have talked about the integrality gap. Now let's move on hardness. It is impossible, of course, to define formally what is an hard Tsp instance. Some attempts in the literature are done to define some coefficients that are related with the hardness. So you start with a Tsp instance and you, in some way, associate it with a Tsp instance, a coefficient, and you prove, it is impossible to do it by hand, but experimentally, you are able to say that this coefficient is related to hardness. And so we can try to say two definitions of hardness. So first definition, instances with an high integrality gap, and second definition, instances that require high runtime to be solved to optimum. Of course, the meaning of runtime is strongly connected to how you try to solve these problems. And through the literature, the solver state of art is concorde. That is basically implement a branch and cut with other, in a very clever way and with other preliminary heuristics. But it is a branch and cut. Okay, now the question is, are these definitions related? Because one definition is formal. I mean, integrality gap is a number. You have an instance, you have its optimal solution, its lower bound, you compute the integrality gap, and you have a number. So this is formal. While the runtime, it's not that formal. If you change the machine, you have a different runtime. So these two definitions are related. Okay, I wrote yes, but with caution. I will discuss about this during this presentation. Okay, this is just technicalities. So I've done some tests and I have done the computation on this machine. It is not important. Okay, so this is the timeline of the hard instance. Okay, so the literature starts in 2008 and at least to the best of my knowledge, we have submitted last week on arXiv a preprint that talks about hard to solve instances, and I will go to the detail of all the literature, and at the end I will talk about the parametric family we are working on currently, and I will just mention the last step. So the arXiv work, because it is a bit different of what has done in the past, so I don't think it is very related. Okay, so let's start for the first, we can say, first step of the literature, that is the work done by Benoit and Boyd. So the main goal of this paper is to compute the exact integrality gap for a small value of n number of nodes, and they did this by enumeration. Of course, not enumeration of all the possible instances, as I said, they are infinite, but they did a very clever procedure they proved that they are able to have the exact integrality gap by only considering a finite case. I have to say that this procedure can be extended, but to the best of my knowledge, and also to the best of my attempts, it is computationally infeasible. So it is very hard to go from n from 13 on computationally. As a byproduct, they release a new stronger conjecture for the value of the integrality gap. So they are able to release a conjecture for the value of the integrality gap that strongly depends on the number of nodes. And they also provide a family of instances that has the same integrality gap as the one they have conjectured. So we define, to present this family, I define 3 parameters in this way. As you can see in the bottom of the slide, it is not important the equation, it is just important that you have 3 integer numbers that depends on the number of nodes. And you define these 3 pattern 2 triangles family. So you have on the top part A edges, and each edge costs 1 on A. On the second part you have B edges, and each edge costs 1 on B. On the third part you have C edges, and each edge costs 1 on C. And the edges of the triangles are the weighted sum of the costs of the path they connect. As you can see, this graph is not complete, but at the beginning of the presentation I said that we can restrict ourselves to complete graph. We can imagine this graph as complete because if we connect all the non-connected nodes in this path with the shortest path that can be computed easily, we add this edge and we can imagine this graph is complete. So keep in mind this figure, and for these instances that are parametric, have 3 parameters, and depends on n, then you are able to compute the exact integrality gap, and the integrality gap tends to 4 to 3. So we have a family that asymptotically tends to 4 to 3. And okay, so I leave this family here, I will introduce the other family, and then I will say something about the computational time just at the end. So we have this first family, and this family actually has a solution in constant time because the exact Tsp value is known. Okay, another family was introduced in 2014 by Ugardi, and the main goal of this paper was actually to improve the past state of art in terms of integrality gaps. So before this paper, the community, all communities thought that the integrality gap were 8 to 7, but with this paper, Ugardi were able to prove that actually the integrality gap is 4 to 3. So this is a parametric family, and this family is given by 2 parameters, nu, that is an integer number, and d, that is a positive number. And it is an Euclidean Tsp because we have the exact coordinate in R2 for each node, as you can see in the slide. You displace the node in 3 paths, and you provide a distance between each aligned node equal to d. Okay, in this case, the number of nodes, Ct, is nu times 3. And the author were able to prove that if we choose d according to specific, specific condition as a function of nu, the integrality gap asymptotically tends to 4 to 2. More specifically, they prove that if nu is even and nu is greater to 17, they were able to compute the integrality gap in closed form. And actually, this family has a solution in polynomial time because it is a very specific case of the Euclidean Tsp called convex and one-line Tsp. And so the previous family has a solution in linear time, in constant time, and this has a solution in linear time. Okay, then we have in 2021, so quite recently, Ugardi and Zong, that introduced a family called the tetrahedron instances. This is a Euclidean Tsp in R2, and the name derives from the fact that if you, I don't know if you see the dots, but it seems like a projection of a tetrahedron in the plane. So it is an Euclidean Tsp, the norm is computed according to the R2 norm, and this instance is given by 2 parameters, mu and nu. They were able to prove that integrality gap for the family asymptotically tends to 4 to 2. Okay. As I imagine you have noticed, I have never told about hardness, computational hardness from until now, because these authors was the first one to try to make a sort of parameter tuning in order to see if instances with an high integrality gap are harder, and to try to spot the best configuration of parameters that gives you hard instances, hard to solve instances. So if you take the parameter nu and mu according to these equations, it doesn't matter, just they did the parameter tuning. So if you do this as follows, you obtain that this family are hard to solve for concorde, that we have said that it is the solver, the state-of-art solver. We also note that this family has a specific shape, has also solution in polynomial time. Okay, now we will stop for a minute and make just a small consideration, right? So we started with a three-path and true triangles family, and this is the family with the highest integrality gap. So one may ask, what can we change? And what happens if we change something? So this was what basically we are working on. So the second point, so try to change the number of nodes on each path. And what I obtain is a family that I call the unbalanced three-path family. And the first one is change the way of computing costs between the nodes. And this is what actually Zoeen did. Of course, not only this thing in his paper that you can also find in archive, but a lot of other things, and this is just a part of its work. So let's start with the paper provided by Zoeen. So the idea is to displace point in R3. So now we have the Euclidean space, and we compute the distance with the L1 norm. So this is the rectilinear Tsp instances. The coordinates in this case are given according to three parameters, and this results in a displace of nodes in three parallel lines. And the family name in this case is the one that is reported in this slide, so it's given according to these three parameters that are strongly related with the parameters provided by Benoit and Boyd in 2008. So the shape, I don't know if it's clear, but it is an Euclidean three-dimensional space. We have three parallel lines, and the distance between points that are in the same parallel line are computed according to what Boyd and Benoit did, while the instances between the other instances, so the non-connected one, are computed according to the L2 norm. So in Boyd and Benoit, we had the computation of the non-connected point according to the shortest path. Here we have the L1 norm, so a small modification. And you can find one instance as an example. Okay. In this case, the author was able to prove that the integrality ratio of these instances is at least the quantity reported on the slides. And also they did parameter tuning. So they choose E, J, and K in such a way that if they made these choice instances results to be hard. So what we have to note is that as stated and proven by the author himself, also these instances can be solved in linear time. Okay, last one, the instances we're working on. So let's pick again the graph provided by Benoit and Boyd, and let's do, as they were able to prove, as I have already said, the closed form of the integrality gap. And we ask ourselves what happens in terms of difficulty, so solvability in computationally, I mean. So what happens in terms of difficulty for concorde if we vary A, B, and C? And what I did is a full exploration from n equal to 10 to n equal to 33. So I try all the possible combinations, basically, and I try to see if there are some regularities. And what I did is to plot these triples, so A, B, C, against the required average computational time on 10 independence runs. So for each instance, I run 10 runs because you have to provide a seed, because the concorde also gives some preliminary random heuristic to get to the solution. I did a 10 independence run, I averaged, and then okay. This is the most important picture in the slide, I think, and it is more or less impossible to see it, but these, as you can see, are triangles in R3. So each point corresponds to a triple A, B, C, an integer triple, and each triple corresponds to an instance. As you can see, the hardest is the color of the dot. The hardest is the instance. And we see that there is a sort of regularity. So at the middle of the triangle, so where more or less A is equal to B equal to C, we have that the instances are easy because the dots are white. You cannot see, but they are white, trust me. While at the tips of the triangle, the dots are dark, so are darker and black at the very, very tips. And this is because here we can find the hardest instances. So for that reason, we say that balanced instances are easier than unbalanced ones. Okay. Then what we did is to see the top hardest instances for each n from n equal to 10 to n equal to 33. And we see that the combination a equal to 2, b equal to 3, and c equal to n minus 8 were always present in the top hardest instances. So we did basically a parameter tuning as other previous work, and then we are able to define this family called a U3 that depends only on n. Just one parameter, the number of nodes, because the other parameters are completely determined by the number of nodes. So the weird thing is that the integrality gap can be computed in closed form, and asymptotically tends to 1.21. So all the family we have seen have integrality gap that tends to 43, while this is bounded with a less smaller number. Also, disclaimer, actually these instances can be solved in constant time as the exact Tsp value is known in closed form. Okay. Okay, so at the beginning I start by saying that we can imagine that if we have a high integrality gap, we have to do a lot of branching, we have to do a lot of branching, and so the instances results to be harder. This was our original idea. But when we put all the things together, we say that actually this is not completely true, because the instances with the highest integrality gap at the blue one, the one provided by Benoit and Boyd, and this, maybe you cannot see the colors properly, but is this line, the second line. And the integrality gap provided by Zong in 2021 is the second higher integrality gap, and it is associated with the top hardest instances. The yellow line in the right plot is the integrality gap of the unbalanced triplet families. And it is bounded with a number that is less than 4 to 3, actually quite a lot less, but it is the second top hardest instance that we are able to provide. And also, as you can see, there is neither concordance in terms of the other two integrality gaps. So what can we say is that integrality gap is not the full story. Okay, now I try to sum up and say something about what we're actually doing. So all the instances we have seen are parametric instances. So these instances are given a priori by a specific tuning parameter given in order to achieve something. Also, we have observed that on the contrary of we expected, there is a weak relation between high integrality gap and hardness, while we expected the opposite. Furthermore, as I said for all the instances, even if the instances are hard to solve for concorde, that is a generic Tsp solver, right? The left plot is the logarithm scheme of the computational time. So, for instance, with n equal to 40, we have 10 to the power of 4 seconds required to solve these instances. So this instance results to be hard if we use a generic Tsp solver. If we use the exact algorithm for the specific case, all the instances can be solved in at most a time that is polynomial. So what we are currently working is to try to provide a new parametric family, such as any known polynomial time algorithm can solve, and we can study Tsp hardness property by varying the parameters, as I said in the plot with triangles, right? And we are also working on a coefficient that is monotonically related to the difficulty of an instance. So this is quite hard. We have a coefficient, as I said at the very beginning, that only works for the Euclidean Euclidean Tsp, and that can basically only be used when you already know the optimal solution. What we are trying to achieve is to get a coefficient that can be computed a priori. So given an instance, compute the coefficient. Also, but I think that is not fully related of what I've talked today, we have also introduced a new procedure on a preprint that you can find on archive to generate or to solve Tsp instances with an high integrality gap, and that also are hard to solve for concorde. The reason why I think they are not strongly related with this one is that these instances are non-parametric, so are completely pseudo-random, not properly random, instances that can have basically any kind of structure. And the point is that as they are non-parametric, it results to be pretty hard to make parameter tuning to see what are the main causes of the hardness and to study it from a theoretical perspective. And okay, I'm done. Thank you very much.
Has anyone here some question to do? Okay, you do.
Okay, then. Very nice talk, thank you very much. And please, I would like to know something more about this integrality gap. I'm not understanding fully. It seems to me it's a measure or some kind of distance between the feasible solutions on your space and the ones in the relaxed space. What does it measure?
Okay. So during this presentation, I have expressed it as a number. Okay, 1 dots, blah blah. But basically, in some paper, you find it as a percentage. So it is how much your lower bound is close to your integer solution. Basically, your lower bound is something that is easy to compute. Also, if you look at the integer formulation, if you look at the integer formulation, another lower bound is the one provided by just removing the Superimation Constraint. So you get, you can imagine that the optimal solution can have disjointures, and as the polytope is bigger, the lower bound is, you have a lower bound. And so you can define another integrality gap. But basically the integrality gap is the distance between the lower bound you are considering and the real optimal solution. So the happiest moment is where you are able to compute in an easy way a lower bound that is very close to the real solution, right? Because you are mostly interested in compute solution quick, in an easy way. Okay.
My next question would be if it is an indicator of the, it should define a level curve on the solution, on the set of solutions. Somehow we are saying if we take all the hardest problems, they will be at least close enough, but not more than this distance or this gap.
Okay.
And they form a sort of localized plot, as we have seen on the triangles. Or I'm not getting it.
No, this is what we actually think. So we think that in some sense the hardest instances share some properties, right? So for instance, I didn't go through the detail because I thought that it would have been better to just give an overview, but we have also observed that all the hard instances have a specific non-integer structure of the solution, and with only 0, 1/2 entries. And also there is a conjecture about that in the literature. And yes, we imagine that all the hard instances are localized in some sense in a specific space. And this has been widely discussed actually in this work. Okay, when we basically pick one solution of the relaxed problem, and we did some stuff, and at the end we come up with an hard instance. But if we look at the difference between the starting instances and the new one, we say that the direction in which the easy instance moved to the hard one is pretty the same, right? So the vertex, the the relaxed solution performs some modification and assume a specific shape, and the costs become very, very more regular with respect to the starting instance. So yes, we imagine that there is a zone in the cone, in the metric cone, in which we can spot the early instance, but it's not easy to find it.
Thank you very much.
It tends to go to the vertex, so it looks like an integer problem.
Yes. This is basically, indeed, the title is by branch and cat. So we perform a function that takes as input a vertex of the relaxation and returns a Tsp instance that we have proven that it has an integrality gap eigen from the starting instance. Eigen greater or sorry.
Greater or
equal than the starting instance, and we have computational evidence that the instance we have are hard. But there is also a section dedicated to try to figure out what make this instance hard. It's still an open question, actually. Yes.
Thank you very much.
Okay. So is there any other question in here? So if not, I have one. And mine is, I've seen that actually you have been talking about concorde, actually I read that somewhere. And there are any other solvers that you tried and other solutions that
Yes. Okay, so concorde is one of the Tsp solver. Of course, you can implement your own by just implement theoretically the problem I have presented. But what we have observed is that the trends are similar. We have tried another couple of implementation of the branch and cut solver. Also, with one specific implementation, we have observed that the yellow line is above the purple one, so the unbalanced three-path family result to be harder with respect to the one provided by Zoong. But actually, concorde is the state of art, is the most used through the literature, so I just presented the result with respect to this solver.
Which I think is another problem in defining what is an hard distance to solve. So
Yes,
there are
yes,
ways to solve them.
yes. I mean, I think that the scientific community agree to use concorde.
Yeah, it's the standard that you refer to. Yeah. So if there are any other questions, I think we can